share. Thank you. Right. Give me a minute. Okay, so we are back again with the same discussion. I think we discussed the topic a little bit last week on the storage, which is more in specific to the Azure storage, and we understood few things around the Azure storage itself, right? So we'll try to understand, we'll try to recap quickly. Few of you guys who were not attended earlier will be able to get hold of the things, and then we'll move on from there. Right, so I don't want to get into the basics of Azure. So like any other service on Azure, you have a service called as storage service, or we can call it as storage account is one way of using the storage solutions. Right now, as we discussed earlier, we can categorize the entire storage stuff into two parts, right? One is managed storage and unmanaged storage. So the Azure storage solutions can be categorized into one of these two, the managed and unmanaged. Now, as the name says, in the managed storage, as we discussed in our earlier session, it is managed by your Azure. So you as an admin will not be taking care much in this area. Everything is automatically handled by your Azure itself. Whereas in contrast, the unmanaged storage, you as an administrator will be creating a storage account and creating the type of storage that which you want to use and so on. So when you create a virtual machine or when you deploy virtual machines in Azure, most of the times, until and unless you go and deselect the managed storage and select it as unmanaged, the default way the VMs will get created, or the disk that whatever reside, they will be part of your managed storage. So what I'm trying to say here is, it is recommended to use managed storage, at least for the virtual machines, but you still have an option to go and use an unmanaged storage as well. To use an unmanaged storage, we use something called a storage account. Now, what is the storage account? A storage account is an entity which helps you to go and create an account to store some services related to storage. So a storage account comprises or can be used for usage of tables, which is a type of storage, queues, which is another type of storage, files like file share, and fourth one is blobs, right, which stands for binary large object. We'll try to understand these things. So in order to use an unmanaged storage, you will go with a storage account. A storage account, once you create it, within the storage account, you can use one of these services. So in order to use these four services, a storage account is must. And how do I create a storage account? Like any service that which you create within Azure, so you have here an option called as storage accounts. Or of course, you can go and search it from here within the search bar, where you can go and type storage account, right? That's where it will take you to the storage accounts. Right, here we are. Now, as we discussed last time, the max you can go up to 500 TB of data within one storage account. So what they say is we can go up to 500 TB. You can go up to 500 TB of data. Now this 500 TB of data, that whatever you are going to go and use, can be either completely table, it can be only queues, or it can be files and blobs. And again, there is a variation, the maximum supported size based on the service that which you use. But there are a couple of regions within Azure which allows petabyte of data storage. So if you go and look at the Azure limits, let me quickly show you that. Azure storage limits. So most of the services, right, the services in Azure will have a limit that can be a soft limit or that can be hard limit. Similarly, your storage service will also have certain limits. For example, number of storage accounts you can go and create per one subscription. You can go up to maximum 250 storage accounts, which means that I can create up to 250 storage accounts here. Right? And similarly, how many blobs you can create? How many blobs you can create? There is no limit as such. And there is a limit for the ingress and egress, which means that the access, your access out of data access out of your storage account, or when you copy the data into the storage account, and so on. So there is a limit for each and every service that whatever we use. And when it comes to the storage account capacity, if you look at it, though it says it is 500 TB, but there are few locations which can support up to 2 petabytes. And what are they? Europe and US. So you may have to go and look at the documentation to understand what are those regions which will support up to 2 petabytes. But other regions will support only 500 terabytes. So when you create a storage account, so what the maximum space that which you can use here is up to 500 TB. So to create a storage account, all you need to do is go and click on this add button, which will allow you to go and fill some data, which basically where you go and put a storage group and subscription. As we all know, subscription is meant for billing, right? So you are billing this particular service, whatever you are using, to a specific subscription called as pay as you go. If you are an organization, you may have multiple departments, or you may have multiple business units, and each business unit or department may have their own subscription, which does make sense because you may want to bill it to that department, whoever is using this particular service. That's where your subscription comes into picture. Now, if you are grouping this, if you want to group the services into certain category, either based on project or based on location or whatsoever, then you use this resource called as resource group. So resource group is used to categorize the things, right? So that's what it is. And then a storage account name. And this storage account name should be unique, right? It should be unique across, across the different storage accounts within the Azure. So when you put some name here, it goes and validates whether this particular name is available or not, right? So let me go and put storage account, and this is already taken by somebody else. So you need to give a unique name which is not being used by somebody else. So I'll name it as techies storage account. And once you create the storage account, you will be putting that in one of the regions, one of the locations, right? So we all know that the Azure environment is divided into multiple geographies, and each geography will have multiple regions, and this location is the region that what we are talking. And then it will ask you the performance. Now, when it comes to the performance, it is asking you whether you need a standard storage or you need a premium storage. So based on your requirement, based on your performance requirements, you will be selecting either standard or premium. Because there is a better performance in premium solution, then the cost is obviously high, right? So for this demonstration, we'll go with standard. And then you have something called as account kind. Within the standard, you have three types of accounts. A general purpose V2, or we call it as storage version 2. General purpose V1, it is called as storage, and there is something called as blob storage. Now, what is the difference between all these three? All these three will provide, okay, sorry. The first one, general purpose for V2 and general purpose V1 will provide all these four services that whatever we are talking. Whereas the other one will only provide one service more in specific, that is called as blob service. So if you are looking for a solution where you need only blobs, then you can go with something called as blob storage. If you are looking for all the four solutions as a part of your storage account, then you go with general purpose V2. And what is general purpose V1? It's a legacy account type, which no longer recommended to use. And as I said in our previous class, most of the features, anything newly gets added, they will be added to general purpose V2. That's the reason it's always recommended to get into general purpose V2 and never use general purpose V1 until and unless you have some legacy stuff kind of situation. So when you go and select, let us say that I am selecting version 2 general purpose, which is an account type, then it will ask you what is the high availability solution you want. And within that, you have multiple replication solutions, which basically provides you a data high availability within the storage account. So there are multiple types of replications. One is LRS, second one is ZRS, third one is geo-redundant storage, and then RAGRS. And the other two are still in preview, which are not in production yet, which means that there will not be support from the Microsoft even if you use it. Now to quickly recap, locally redundant storage, you will have when you create a storage account, right? So let us say that this is your storage account. And within this storage account, let us say that you are using the general purpose V2 solution or account type. When you write data, whether it can be table, it might be queue, it might be file, or it might be blob, anything for that matter. Your data, that whatever you are writing to Azure, will be written to three different storage devices. Three different storage devices. And when you write data to your storage account, when you copy some file or when you create a table or when you upload a file to Blob, it will be written to all these three storage devices. So in LRS, locally redundant storage, your data is present on three different storage devices, which means that if one of these devices goes bad, you still have your data available on the other two disks in the other storage devices. And the storage, when you copy a file or something, it will only commit that action once it is done with writing to all these three devices. So in locally redundant storage, your data is local to that particular data centers. Let us say that if I am putting this storage account in central US, then my data will be in central US data center, one of the data center in central US. And all these storage devices are part of the same data center. And what happens if this data center goes down? Right? Which might be rare cases, but who knows? And these situations, then you may look at a solution called as ZRS, zone redundant storage. In zone redundant storage, you will have two data centers or more than one data center in a specific region. Now in central US, let us say that you have this data center and you have another data center. The data that whatever you write to the primary data center will be replicated to you another data center within the same region. Or another zone we can call it as. So a zone is group of data centers with independent power, cooling, and network. What it means is, if the first data center within that region goes bad, your data is still accessible from a different data center within the same region. Right? So that is your ZRS. And then the other one you have is geo-redundant. What happens if this entire region itself is down? Though you are having your data in two different independent data centers across the zone, you are still at the risk of losing your data, your applications outage, and so on. So if you are looking for a disaster recovery solution beyond the region, then you can go with a solution called as GRS. Now in geo-redundant, you go and create select another geographical location, let us say East US2, and it takes care at the back end. That's what will happen. And then you go and replicate your data to this particular region. So you can invoke the disaster recovery whenever there is a requirement as such. So based on your requirement, you go and select one of these replication solutions, and cost will obviously vary based on what solution you are going to go and select here. And the read access geo redundant, the replica copy in a different geographical will be read only, whereas in geo redundant storage, the copy is read write. So that's what we need to understand. So for this demonstration, I'll go with locally redundant storage. And then you have something called as access tiers. At a very high level for this session, we will discuss this in our next class as well in next Saturday, but cool and hot tiers will define what type of data you store. Whether you store data which is frequently accessible, then you choose hot tier. Or you access the data very infrequently, then you can go with cool tier. If you put some data in cool tier and try to access it like hot tier, then the charges will be huge. So based on your requirement, you go and select either you want a cool tier, you want a hot tier, and of course there's one more tier called as archive tier, which we will be discussing in our next class, as I said, but these are the two tiers. Okay, so for this demonstration, we leave that as hot tier itself. And you want to restrict the access to this particular storage account, then you can do it. You can restrict to a specific network. By default, it is accessible from the public networks as well. But if you want to restrict it, then you can go and select the network from which you want users to access this. And this storage account is accessible only from that network where you are restricting the access if it is a secure data. And there's something called as private endpoint. You can add your endpoints here. So let us go with the default one. Let us say that the data that whatever we are going to put in the storage account is okay to be accessed from different geographical locations on over the public internet as well. And if you go to the advanced, and we discussed this in our earlier session as well, security is a big point of discussion when you go and adopt some solution, right? Your customer will ask boss, okay, so I am going and putting my data on Azure storage. Then what about the security of my data? So what happens if I am transferring the data, whether it is secured during the transfer, whether it is secure during whether it is secure at rest, in the sense after copying the data. So security here will help you to go and use HTTPS when it comes to the data transfer. And whatever the data that which you use here, you put here, is also secured using some encryption keys. So data in transit and data at rest both are encrypted, and by default this secure transfer is enabled, which means that whatever the data you are uploading into the storage account or downloading from the storage account is secured, which means that encrypted. And then you have something called as data protection. So data protection will help you retaining the data for few days, even if you delete it. You can go up to maximum 365 days. That is called as soft delete, right? So though you delete your data from the blob, Azure retains the data for maximum of 365 days, that which you can go with. Default is 7 days. So if you want to enable soft delete, of course you can do it. Right, so big data and data lake, that's another solution for big data stuff. And then tagging, it is categorization, and then you can go and create a storage account. So at the end, it validates whatever the parameters that which you pass during the configuration in each of these blades. And then once the validation is passed, then you can go and create a storage account. That's how you can go and create a storage account. We'll wait for the storage account to get created. It'll take a couple of minutes. We'll wait for that deployment. So you can see the notification bell here, that whatever you see the bell icon, which will show you what is the status of your deployment, whether it is in progress, whether it is completed, and so on. You can see here the status. It is still updating. For some reason it is little slow, but you can find the status of your deployment here in the notification, whatever you see. So you created your storage account. You can go to the storage account from here directly, or you can go back to the storage accounts. When you refresh it, you should be able to see the storage account that which you created here in a while. For some reason, it is still not showing. Yeah, you can see it. So what is the type of storage account you created? You created a type of general purpose V2, and then in a location called as central US. Now, what are the services that which are available within the storage account? The services that what you see here are the services that which you can use it. Now, you can see the services, file shares. You can copy use this as a file share, that what you use in your on-premises environment, a file server or whatsoever. Similarly, you can use a file share here. If you are looking for a NoSQL database solution, then you can use tables. Or if you are looking for a solution which is a messaging solution, which is required for a communication between your application components, you can go with queues. And if you are looking for a solution which stores some unstructured files, then you can go with blobs, which which is part of the containers. Okay, so earlier in the services you used to see this as blob. Now they changed it to containers. We'll discuss that why it is changed, why there's a change in that. But blobs, the containers can be used for blobs. So these are the 4 different services that which are available within the storage account. Now let us try to quickly understand the container. Container will help you to create a service called as blob service. Now a blob stands for something called as binary large object. So within the blob storage, you can store the kind of files. The files, whatever you are storing, will be stored as objects, and you can store media files. You can store normal JPG files. You can store your text files, and you can store your VHDs based on the different types of blobs you select. So blob can be further categorized into 3 types. Okay, so blobs can be categorized into 3 types. One is block blob. Second one is append blob. And third one is page blob. So we were discussing about managed storage, where we were saying that, okay, in the managed storage, we use these storage for VMs creation. By default, it is managed storage. But let us say for my VMs, I want to use an unmanaged storage. To use VHDs, you use a blob type called as page blobs. So when you use an unmanaged storage and you are creating a virtual machine using an unmanaged storage, your VHDs, the disk files that whatever will hold your operating system or data drives, they will be part of your page blob. That's what the use of the page blob is. Page blob is recommended to use for storing the VHD files. The next blob type is append blob. As the name itself says, append. This is recommended to use for log files. Log files where the data read will be, data write will be at the end of the file, right? So append. The other type of file is a block blob, where you will use this particular blob type to store some media files, JPG files, and some unstructured binary files as well. So based on your requirement, you go and select and use one of these blobs. So in order to use a blob, you have to have a container first. So what I'm trying to say here is your blobs will reside in containers. So one container can have multiple number of blobs, and one storage account can have multiple containers. So in order to use a blob service, what you have to do first is you have to go and create a container. So you can imagine a container as a big box. Within that big box, you have one more box which is called as blob, and within that one box, you can categorize that blob to the requirement that whatever you have, which can be page, which can be append, which can be block blob. So let us say that I have a requirement of a block service. Then to use a block service, I have to create a container. And the container will have a name, right? Let us name it as demo container. Let us name it as demo container. And it will ask you, boss, what is the level of access you want to provide to this particular container? We have a control of how do we control the access. We'll be discussing that, but at this level, whatever you see here is what we are going to understand. Okay, there is something beyond this as well, which we will be discussing. So there are three types of access levels which you can use to control the access to the container itself. And what are they? One is private, which means that no anonymous access, which means that only the people, whoever are supposed to access, will be accessing this, and how they access that thing will come to that at the later point of time. Whereas the other option, blob anonymous read, for blobs only, and then container anonymous read access for containers and blobs. So based on the access level that which you define, it will define whether it is accessible for the anonymous users over the internet or not, within the network or not, whatever you define here. Let us say that I want to allow anonymous access for this particular container. So within this container, we created a container. Let me open a new file here. So you created a container. This container, we named it as demo container. And this container can hold blob, right? You can create blobs within that, right? So let me go and use this container. Let me get into this container and then use this for blob services. Now you can see here, no blobs found. You can see here, no blobs found, which means that there are no blobs created, which is blank. In order to use one of these blob services, that's what I said earlier. What are they? Block, page, append. These are the different types of blobs, right? So block blob, page blob, append blob. So in order to use these services, I should go to this option of upload. So during uploading the file, you will be selecting what type of blob you are going to use. But I don't see this option here. When you go to the advanced, you can see what type of blob it is. And as I said, there are three types of blobs: page blob, append blob, and block blob. Let us say that you want to use a page blob. Now, as we discussed in few minutes back, page blobs can be used, is recommended to use for VHD files. Now, what is a VHD file? A disk file on a hypervisor, right? If you want to use this as an append blob, select that. And then if you want to use it as a block blob, select it. So based on your requirement, you can go and select one of the blob types. And then what we need to understand here is block size. Now your data, that whatever you are storing on this particular blob, any blob, one of those three blobs, will be divided into multiple blocks, right? So your data, that whatever you are putting here on this, will be divided into multiple blocks. That's how it is structured. Let us say you are using a block blob, and this will have different blocks. And each block will have a size. That's what the size of the block is defining. So when you're going with a block blob, the maximum size that what your block blob, each block will have is up to 100 MB, which means each block can be up to 100 MB. So if I'm going with a block blob of 100 MB, of block size, what is the maximum size of my block should be? What is the maximum size it supports? Let us go back to this portal. If you click on this information, what you can see, a blob storage supports 3 blobs types, all these 3, right? And when you go to this one, how many maximum blocks you can have? Up to 50,000. Which means a block blob can have up to 50,000 of blocks. What is the maximum count? 50,000. So these boxes, if you imagine that you can have 50,000 of these boxes within that block blob, and each size is 100 MB. What is the maximum storage capacity? 50,000 into 500 MB, right? So that is your maximum storage capacity of your block blob, right? Let me show you that. So it is, where we had gone, sorry for that. It is 50,000 into 100. So this is in MB. I'm converting that into GB. I'm converting further that into TB. So when you are using a block blob, the maximum storage you can go up to is 4.7 TB. What is that? 4.7 TB. Right? So when I am using here this solution of block blob, and I am making sure that my block size is 100 MB, I can store a block blob of size up to 4.7 TB. Right? So it's easy if you understand things to remember these numbers. Otherwise, why do we have to mug it up, right? So there is a logic, right? When documentation, if they say that okay, maximum is supports up to 4.7 TB, then this is what it is, right? And this is the reason why it is 4.7 TB. Let us say that I want to use a block blob and I want to upload a file into this block blob. And let us say that I want to upload this file. And then you can go and upload this. Now this file, that whatever you stored, is part of your block blob. And how do you access it? There are different solutions to access that, but this is how you upload data. And do I need to use this portal to upload data every time? Not necessarily. There are other ways of doing it. There is something called as Storage Explorer, which we will be discussing in our next sessions, which we can use to upload and download data to storage accounts. But this is one way of uploading data. Let us say that you have a requirement to go and create a page blob. You can go and select page blob, or you can go with append blob. And again, the calculation remains same. So in append blob, maximum you can go up to, what is that, 4 MB. Whereas in block blob, you can go up to 100 MB, a block size. Now it is 4 MB into 50,000 is what max it gives, the storage capacity of the append blob. Similarly, your page blob will also have a limitation. So based on your requirement, you go and create the blob types. So if you get into the object itself, you will see further details. You can access this object using an URL. If I go and copy this, sorry for that. and then put it in a browser here. Let me see if I can access it. I can, right? I can access it. So based on the permissions that what you gave, right? So if you go back to the container, if you look at this, you are allowing an anonymous access here. That's the reason you could able to access it. If I change that to the private access, and then if I go back and try to access it one more time, then it will not be, because you are restricting the access here at the access level. You are saying that boss, no anonymous access, which means that it is private. That's the reason you are not able to access it. And what it says, of course, this message, error message, does mislead us, right? So what it says, resource does not exist. And it does mislead, right? So anyway, whatever the case, right? So what you're seeing here, because you went ahead with an private, which means that no anonymous access, you are not able to access this particular object, whatever you uploaded here. When you change that back to allow anonymous access, you will be able to access that file. Now, one important thing that what we need to understand here is this thing. Let me try to copy this here and try to understand this. So you are accessing a blob storage, right? And the URL is like this. What is that? Your HTTPS, which means that secure. And then the next item, what you have, a storage account name. Right? And then what service you are using? I am using Blob service, the service name. Then .core.windows.net. So if you are using a Blob service, the service name will be Blob. If you are accessing a queue service, then your URL will be like this. Storage account name, queue.core.windows.net. If you are using a table service, or if you are accessing a table service, you will be accessing it like this. If you are accessing a file service, then you'll access it like this. So the services within the storage accounts are accessed or can be accessed using a URL, and the naming convention of the URL will be your storage account, your service name, and then core.windows.net. And of course, there are some encryption keys and all those things will come into picture, which we will be discussing in our subsequent classes, but this is how it will be. So now we are accessing a blob storage. That's the reason the name, when you look at here, when you look at the name here, where it has gone, give me a minute. Right, when you look at the name here, it is .blob.core.windows.net. And then it is talking about the container and it is talking about the file itself. But at a top level, this is how it will be. Right? This is how it will be. Let us go back to our container. And I can create one more container. I can create a number of containers within the storage account. So a storage account can have multiple containers. These containers will have binary large objects. And we'll come back to this for a discussion. Let us go back to something else. Let us quickly see a table. Now, as I said, it is a table content will be, the table solution or the service will be used when you are looking for to store some unstructured data. Relational database tables are different than this one, right? It is not a relational database tables, that you don't have to follow certain schema or whatsoever when you use this, right? So if you want to use this as a table service within this particular storage account, then you go and create a table, call it as demo table. And then if you look at this URL, then what does it say? HTTPS, your storage account name. That's what we did when we created it, table.core.windows.net. And of course, you can go and use this within your what you call application or whatsoever to go and dump data into this particular table. That's how you can go and use a what you call it as table service. And you have one more service which is called as queue. A queue service is used to send messages across different components within the application. Let us say that you have an application which has got multiple components, and all those components need to kind of send messages to each other to perform some activity. That's where your queues will come into picture. Now queues, as I said, basically used for communication between different components within the application. And then this uses FIFO, first in, first out, which means that the first message that whatever is getting into the queue will be the first message which will be going out. Right, so it is straightforward. Let us say that you want to create a demo queue. You can go and create it. And of course, this will also have a URL. And again, instead of table, now you see a queue here. So your storage account can hold multiple services. And we'll come back to the file share. We'll take a while. We'll wait for a while and then we'll come back to the file share. But these are the three things. And how do I access? I access them using URL. Right? Now these are the three different services within the storage account. Now you also have another service called as file shares, which means this storage account, that whatever you are created, which is techie storage account, can also be used as a file share, where you can go and create a file share and put data and use the file share link to share with your users to access the data within the file share. So how do you create a file share? Same way, right? So I'll name it as demo fs. What is the space that which you want to allocate? What is the space that which you want to allocate? Let us say that I want to allocate 2 GB of space, right? You can go up to 55,120 GB. That's a max size that which you can use, right? So there's a max size that what is supported in the standard what do you call it as performance model. This may change in the premium, which we will be seeing, but for this discussion I am saying that I will use 2 GB of data for the file share. Now this file share, whatever you created, can be used to store your files like how you store on your Linux file server or Windows file server or whatsoever. You can upload data, you can create directories, and then you can connect to this file share. And how do you connect to this file share? When you click on this connect, what it does is it gives you an option to map this file share as a drive in Windows. So if you look at this code, that whatever they are giving here to you, let me copy this in a notepad. So you are mapping this. right? You're first testing the connectivity, right? Test hyphen net connection and then hyphen computer name. And this is what? This is your file share URL, your storage account, service name core.windows.net, and on what port? 455, which means that secure SMB protocol, right? And then you are using this command to kind of use this key. You can see there is a big secure key which we will be discussing at the later point of time. This key is very important. If this key you have, then you will be able to connect to the shared drive. Otherwise, you will not be. That's how your Azure uses to authenticate whether this is a genuine request or not. And then what you are using a map drive command to map it as a Z drive, right? So you can connect this file share that whatever you created as a map drive on your operating system if it is Windows. And of course, you also have a command line interface. This is a PowerShell commands, and similarly, you have a command line interface of the same, right? CMD format. You can see the same thing, yeah, just change in the commands, that's all. Or if you're using a Linux machine and you want to mount this particular file share to a Linux machine, then you have these commands. And if you have a Macintosh OS, then you have these commands. So you can map this file share and then you can upload and download data to this file share. Right? Now, how the access part is controlled, which is still yet to be discussed. We'll go to that in our next class. But for this session, you need to understand that you can create a file share. You can upload and download data into the file share using this portal itself. As I said, there are other solutions as well. And you can increase the quota based on your requirement. And you can create multiple directories within this. These are logical directories. When we say directories, it's not the directory, it's logical structuring of your data. So you can use a storage account to go and create and use these services, right? One of the services. And again, we are in a standard performance model with general purpose V2 account type. Let us quickly go back to our storage account once again. I want to create one more storage account. And I'll again go and put this in a same resource group. I'll name it as techies storage account demo 2. Okay, let us call that 2, and then we'll go and put it in a location called as central US. Let us try to understand things here further. We had seen this, right? And I said don't use this one, right? And then you have blob storage. So when you want to use this solution only for blobs, if you want to use this solution only for blobs, you'll go with blob storage account creation. Or if you have a requirement of all those 4 services, then you can go with general purpose V2. But I have a requirement of only blob storage. Then I can go and select this account type as blob storage. Now, when you select the blob storage, you can see LRS, GRS, and RAGRS. You don't see ZRS here. So based on the service that which you select, based on the account type that which you select, the replication solutions will also change. So I would request you to go and look at the documentation. There's a good table format in Microsoft Azure documentation, which tells which replication is available in which account type and so on, worth of referring it. So let us say that we'll go with LRS. And then you can go and create. I'm not going to go with those networking and other stuff because we had already discussed that, and create a storage account. Now this storage account, that whatever you created is only for blobs, that to block blobs, right? So that's how you can go and create blob specific storage account. And of course, uploading the data and everything will remain same. There will not be any change in that, but the only thing that what you get is the categorization and performance also. There is a better performance in that. Now let us say that you are creating one more storage account. This time you have a critical production requirement. Then I'll call it as what is that? Techies storage account demo 3. Then again put that in central US. This time I will go with a premium one. Now within the premium one, what are the solutions you have? You have general purpose V2, which means that general purpose V2 account type is available both in standard as well as premium. General purpose V1, again, this is available both in standard and premium. But there are two services here that which you see, or account types that what you see. One is block blob, which means that more in specific to the block blobs, and only file share. If you want to use only file share, then you can go with this one. If you want to use only block blob, you can go with this one. If you want to use all the services, go with this one. So based on your requirement, you go and select premium or standard, and based on the selection that what you have, these account types will change. And extension to that, when you go with premium services, you have only LRS. You don't have that geo-redundant or ZRS and other replication solutions. But how do I attain high availability? There are other solutions around that, but the data is safe enough within the LRS, within the premium. That's what they say, right? So even if you go with a file storage, you will see only LRS. Even if you go with block blob, you will see only LRS. Even if you go with general purpose V1, you will see only LRS. So what we need to understand is, in premium performance of a premium performance, you have only one replication solution, which is called as, what do you call it as? LRS. Okay, guys. So this is very important for us to understand. Right? So likewise, based on your requirement, you go and deploy a storage account, and you can go and use multiple storage account types based on your requirement. And there's a lot to discuss in the next session. We'll discuss about shared access signature. That's what I was saying. There is a, when you look at these keys, right? These are all very important. How do we manage access? How do we control access? There's something called as access keys. We'll try to understand these things in our next session, but we'll stop here for today. I'll just, remove the restriction on unmuting. Let me remove that so that you guys can ask questions if you have any. Okay, so now you can unmute yourself. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Oh goodness, guys, guys, go on mute. Go on mute. Okay. Right. So if you have any questions, please unmute yourself. I'm not going to unmute everybody. You can unmute yourself and you can ask questions if you have any.
This is Prithvi again.
Yep.
I just have a question, like, when you go, you shown the demo of file sharing. So I just wanted to understand how it will be shown as when we see at the user's perspective. Like you said, to map a drive as Z, so that drive will be mapped on the virtual machines on Azure, or we can map that on the local computer as well?
Local computers as well.
Okay,
You
so
can,
that that simply would be like a SharePoint drive mapping.
absolutely right. Yeah. So,
Okay.
because you have this access signature, we call it as, which we'll be discussing in our next session, because you have this, which is a unique identifier, which validates and authenticates your request.
Mm-hmm.
And then you are mapping this on your local PC, which we'll see in our next class, which will be, visible in your Windows Explorer, like any mapped drive that
Okay,
which you do.
I
Right?
got it. I got it. And the second part of the question was the same like SharePoint. We use the user credentials, so we need to use those storage account credentials over there.
I didn't get that. Maybe you have to
I mean,
rephrase that.
when we map that drive on a user computer, so first he probably need to log into the portal,
Yes.
and we will need a separate user, I mean, storage account for him, or we can go it with the one single storage account.
Okay, so a storage account, if you see it here,
Mm-hmm.
let me go back. So this
Yeah.
storage account can have multiple file shares.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Now, your project requirement might be a file share. Then you go and create a file share,
Okay.
and then share this file share related connection stuff to your end users.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
Which means that you are providing access to your end user. If you have 100 members in your project, then all of them will get this whatever the code that which we have, they can map it, right? But again, there are few issues around this, which we will be discussing in our next class. So you may want to have a more granular control on these file shares. That's where your integration of your directory services to the file share can also be done. So all those things, there is mature discussion after this that will help us to understand when it comes to the controlling of the access itself, right? So otherwise, anybody who has got that code can access this, right? So that's the problem there, right? But this is a solution that which we need to discuss first, then we'll move what are the other things beyond this we have.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Cool. That's it from my side. Yeah. Thank you for explaining that for me.
No problems. Anything from anybody, guys? Okay, so if no questions,
So we have a doubt from the participant. I'm just posting it on the chat. Can you please explain?
okay. Let me look at that.
He's asking about, is there possibility to change the created storage type page block to the blob?
So once you upload the file, you want to change it. Is that what you're saying? If that is the case, I think we will not be able to do it. I think we will not be able to do it. So what you can do it, you can transfer that, transfer the data from one blob type to the other, which means you can also do a data transfer across the storage.
So Vinod, is it clear for you?
Did you get what I said? What I'm trying to say here is you will not be able to change the type of the blobs, but you can transfer the data across the blobs, which could help you with that solution if you want to move data across, right? Any
Sir.
other questions?
Yes, sir. He is okay for that one. Yes, he understood the concept.
Okay, so right, we will stop here and then we'll meet next week. Maybe I think we have to spend 2 to 3 weeks in completing this entire storage concepts. I want to complete that everything, then somebody else can take some other topic. As I said in my earlier class, please come forward, share your domain knowledge. Even if you share a small concept, it will help others to learn and then enhance their technical skills. So that is the motto of this group and this community, and all hands are needed here to make this, move ahead and um, give some sessions and then make everybody, to get to a point where they are up to the speed, at least not an expert, but they know what things are and how things will work. And I know there are quite a few group members in this group, but we are seeing very slim participation, but maybe hopefully we'll see good number of participants from the next week onwards. But I would request, if you have or you are willing to share some knowledge with this wonderful community, please feel free to contact either me or the other admins who are part of the group. So that will help us, and then your effort will also be appreciated. So that's a small request from our side as an admin, right? So let us make these things moving on, right? So what is the process to be a member of the group? Okay, drop me your mobile number privately, and then I can get you added to our WhatsApp group. Yeah, so drop me, don't put for everyone, put it privately only to me, the organizers and admins. I'll get that added. Yeah, right. Yeah, I got that. Thank you. Okay, guys, thanks for joining. We'll catch up next week at the same time, and have a great day and great weekend.
Thank you, bro.
Thank you so much.